Everybody, hi, it's great to see you. Ann Richmond, I'm Director of Arizona State University Sustainable Cities Network and Project Cities Program. It's great to see everybody for our federal infrastructure work group, our first kind of official meeting. I'd like to introduce my wing people, which I've got Chandler Escalante, who is our graduate service assistant, who's helping with the Regional Resilience Project and being funded, his position's being funded through the Knowledge Exchange for Resilience Fellowship. So glad that he could be here and assist. And then also Allison Almond, who is our Sustainable Cities Network and Project Cities Project Coordinator. She's going to be working in the background as well. So if you have any technical issues, you can send her a little chat and she can certainly help you out. I would also like to introduce Braden Kay, who's with the City of Tempe. He's the Sustainability Director. Many of you know him from various activities, sustainability activities with the city, but also quite a bit of the regional resilience discussion that's been going on. And so we'll be talking about some of the different initiatives taking place and how we're kind of all trying to pull this together. For those of you that are not familiar with the Sustainable Cities Network, it is an education and outreach program under the Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation and the Global Futures Laboratory. It started in 2009, and it is a free voluntary network for local cities, towns, tribal communities, and counties by which to those practitioners to share best practices and, of course, to interface with ASU sustainability students, faculty, and staff. And so we have a series of work groups that are centered around the interests of communities in Arizona relating to sustainability. And so federal infrastructure is one of those that is being created under that umbrella of SCN to encourage communities and other organizations around Maricopa County to collaborate and coordinate it when it comes to acquiring federal infrastructure funds. And so with that, I think we can probably start our slides, Chandler. So if you want to share your screen, you can certainly do that. And Braden and I will be kind of going back and forth relative to our presentation today, because this is our first meeting to kick off the federal infrastructure work group. And so what we're going to be trying to do is kind of give the background, I think, of where we have been up to this point, talk about what the purpose and the intended goals are for the work group, discuss some of the federal funding streams that are available, and then also get your input on basically how to, I think, go forward with this charge, and then discuss our future meeting schedules. And so with that, this is our agenda. It might ebb and flow a little bit, so we'll see how it goes within a fast hour. You want to go to the next slide, Chandler? There we go. So as many of you know, we have had many different regional resilience efforts happening at the same time, it seems like, over the course of the past year. And so it's been a bit confusing, I think, for people, because some are interrelated and some are separate. And so, but our goal is to move in a more congruent regional, direction and approach to obtain the federal funding so that we can achieve more, both individually as communities, but also regionally when it comes to various priorities associated with sustainability, climate, and resilience. And so most recently, we had our Maricopa County Regional Resilience Celebration on the 8th of February at the Audubon Center. Many of you were there in attendance, so we really appreciate your time. And this was our chance to celebrate 4 of our community-based organizations and their local projects, basically that celebrated the youth, indigenous groups, and community-based organizations. There's also the work of Chispa, Arizona. So many of you know Masavi, Perea, and then Unlimited Potential with Emma Vieira. They have worked to create what's called some guiding principles associated for communities to follow when it comes to working with community-based organizations. We had a lovely program. It was nice. We had a wonderful storyteller, which this is the photo of the young lady who was providing the tribal story to kick off the meeting. And this was orchestrated with the city of Tempe, as well as with the Sustainable Cities Network, and of course was funded through the Vitalist Foundation. And Braden, do you want to say a few words a little bit about the projects that were funded and how the city of Tempe worked with that particular set of groups?
Yeah, so the theory behind this work was to have, there's a lot of discussion about Justice 40 and how we build equity into these federal grants. And so what we wanted to be able to do is highlight some of the existing grant work in Maricopa County that is doing that grassroots work in affected communities, or is working with voices that are marginalized, which is something that many of these federal grants ask for. So we wanted to make sure that those discussions were being had. And what was very clear about the Indigenous artists that spoke and the youth that spoke was that this work needs to be done not just in checking a box on the grant, but that this really requires longer term relationship building. It requires making sure that, enough voice is given to the groups that you're bringing into these grants. And because we knew that that was an issue that we needed to work on, we used some of the money from Vitalist Health Foundation to have Unlimited Potential and CHISPA to create a set of guiding principles for how they want to be worked with in future grants and in future projects. And then we actually took some of the money and gave them the money to create mini grants so that we could test out new ways of working with these grassroots organizations and help us further understand the importance of these guiding principles. And so we're going to publish a blog post about this event, but we'll also publish these guiding principles. And our hope is that with those guiding principles that include inclusion and transparency, that when you go and submit a federal grant, you can say, hey, regionally, we have these set of guiding principles to guide how we do our equity and community-based work. And it shows that the region has been having this conversation to do that. Unlimited Potential and CHISPA have brought together 38 community organizations from across the county to help create those guiding principles. And this was really, a way to, one, help make sure that their voices and needs were articulated, and two, was an opportunity for us to articulate to philanthropic and federal funders that we may want for climate work, that we are working on this and that we have a strategy for that. Thanks, Ann.
Sure, absolutely. And in conjunction with that, you also have the city of Tempe working with ASU in relation to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funded Cool Kids Neighborhood Justice Project. And so that is another initiative that has been functioning at the local level that has been working to elevate youth voices, giving them a seat at the table when it comes to equity. I think you've used the arts as well, Braden, in relation to that. And of course, the Sustainable Cities Network is part of that initiative. Is there anything else you'd like to add about that project?
No, only to say that we also highlighted the Chief Sustainability Officer program at the City of Phoenix as another program that's lifting up youth voices into decision making. So so now we have examples of that. So, and obviously these were not the only examples. We have brilliant examples of this community-based work that's been done by the Nature Conservancy in terms of their ambassador program. We have a lot of different ASU programs that have done community-based engagement. So this was just highlighting several key ones, several ones, but it's not a full gamut of all of the work in this area that's been done. The County Public Health, the Nature Conservancy, ASU, many cities, Trees Matter, a number of nonprofits have all been doing work in this space. And this was one event to help us articulate what that kind of grassroots, how you marry government and grassroots voices together, and then eventually add business voices as well. This was one opportunity to do that. And then our hope is that we'll continue to do that.
Yeah.
We also have held business roundtables with many of our business organizations, including GPEC and Arizona Forward and TNC and EDF and business and environmental organizations together to figure out how they fold into this work as well. So there's a lot of that kind of coordination work that's necessary, and this celebration event was just one version of that. And really appreciate everyone that's come. And then we will send out a blog post that reviews the key lessons learned out of the event as well.
Sure. And in addition to the resilience celebration, there are other efforts going on. So example is Maricopa Association of Governments has their new ROSE work group, which if you haven't heard about it, it stands for Resilience, Open Space, Sustainability, and Environment. It just kicked off this month. So I'm sure there will be lots of discussion and activities relating to regional resilience that come out of that. So we're hoping that Tim Franquist can eventually be part of our discussions as well. And as Braden mentioned, you have all these other wonderful organizations at the local level that are, making progress, working on individual projects that do need to be kind of pulled up into this overall effort. And in addition, we have Sustainable Cities Network, which has their individual work groups. And so through SCN, we've hosted a series of workshop meetings in 2020 addressing different types of federal funding, trying to create that baseline understanding of what the capacity is around the topics. And that has kind of also led up to the federal infrastructure work group being formed. So Chandler, do you want to move to the next slide? Yeah, and so that's kind of the background information is having a basic understanding of the different funding, basically opportunities. And so we've been hosting these meetings throughout 2022 at different intervals, focusing on the federal funding. So within the IIJA, you've got the Infrastructure Reduction Act, the Biden infrastructure bill, and of course, trying to understand where all the funding pockets are, but most importantly, how Arizona can leverage that, and in particular, Maricopa County as well. We do understand that small and rural communities are, in a different spot. And so SCN is also looking to create a small communities work group to help them facilitate taking advantage of different pockets of money to move their projects forward as well. And so through this, through the discussions with we've been calling it the regional infrastructure exchange discussions, there have been primarily 4 buckets of project work that have come to the surface. Braden and Brianne Fisher, who's also with the city of Tempe, have been primary to those conversations. And though those tend to be, interestingly, somewhat aligned with the Sustainable Cities Network work groups, which I think has a lot of potential. So Braden, do you want to talk a little bit about how the buckets have come to fruition through the process of discussion?
Yeah, so basically last spring, we got together and had a series of federal grant workshops. Many of you attended those. We married city interest with some of the grants we knew we would be coming out. And so the electric vehicles, working group, Karen Dene run that. They're continuing to track federal grants and what our involvement both regionally and at each city level can be in electric vehicles. So that's an area. Obviously, we have our regular meetings on heat relief and response. There might be a few upcoming grant opportunities that fit into heat relief and response. Urban forestry and green water infrastructure. Tim from City of Scottsdale helps run that working group. We know that a lot of us are involved in Rio Reimagined. There will be some money that has not come out yet or been fully defined in ecosystems restoration. There also is going to be direct federal funding for urban forestry. So that group that funding has not been fully articulated yet, so we're waiting for that to emerge. And then we also have the Emma Vieira and the County Public Health has been hosting the Energy Insecurity Working Group, and there will be a variety of different opportunities to apply for funding. None of those have really emerged yet, but that's a monthly call that exists that's ready to organized around federal funding when that comes out. So those were sort of 4 key working group areas that sort of match to existing working groups that we either have at SCN or that the county and Emma have been running in terms of energy and security, and they're all sort of regularly gathering. So if you know you're interested in one of these areas, please let Ann and Chandler know, and we can make sure that you're directed to the appropriate leadership of each of these 4 buckets. So and we may spend more time in this group on any one of these areas as the grant notifications come out.
Sure. And I just want to also mention that we realize there are topics where funding is available. So there may be some other topics that come up that aren't in these buckets. And so certainly we want to be receptive to that. But this is kind of where we see some of the entry point opportunities, I think, based on interest and community need and also capacity as well. Okay, so this is a bit of a messy slide, but I think it shows several of the levels that we've been talking about as far as the where some of these efforts, these discussions have been taking. As we mentioned, the partnership level, which is the electrical vehicles, the ecosystem services, the healthy streets, the green codes. These have all been ongoing discussions in various organizations and with groups across the valley, but they also align with various Sustainable Cities Network work group discussions. And then we're hoping to pull that up into federal infrastructure work groups, so kind of create that continuity. Braden.
And this slide also shows 2 grant areas that funding areas that we didn't talk about in the spring that have now emerged, that are emerging. So one is the Healthy Streets. So that's a grant program out of the Department of Transportation. We're eagerly awaiting that coming out. That program is going to be very easy to apply to for streets infrastructure programs. We're expecting on this one, City of Phoenix to take the lead. But we're hoping that we can build a grant with the City of Phoenix that includes some pilot projects in other cities and it includes lessons learned. So that's an example, and that's one that the Green Infrastructure Working Group will be able to work on. So that's a grant that has emerged. We think that's going to be coming out this summer, hopefully. Fingers crossed. And then there's already been a grant that's come out in the Resilient Energy Code space. From the Department of Energy. There's 9 Arizona cities that are all working together already. So this is an example of one where we already got a bunch of folks together. We've been talking to a lot of environmental organizations about creating a Southwest specific building code to make sure that our building code is fully working on resilience to extreme heat and working in a place-based geographic specific way of building a green building code and a building code appropriate for our region. If you haven't been linked into this work yet, feel free to drop in the chat that your city or you are interested in knowing more about this program. We can put you in touch with Leslie Ethan in Tucson. She's been running that. And then hopefully there's an opportunity for Leslie to present to the solar and energy efficiency work group on that. And regularly, it's going to be a 3-year process, I think. So if we do get funded, so we'll be using the solar and energy efficiency work group regularly to work on that. Right now, City of Phoenix is not one of the cities that's incorporated into the 9 cities. There's still an opportunity if there's interest to incorporate Phoenix, and that there's is an opportunity to incorporate other cities in Arizona as well. And potentially even even counties. We had some county interest, and then we've also incorporated New Mexico cities into this work. So Las Cruces and Santa Fe and Albuquerque are all signed up to the project as well, so that it's you know, a regional wide code. So anyway, it's a very dynamic process. We're trying to match SCN work groups, what needs cities and governments and nonprofits have with what the grant funding is. And so we know that these slides are sort of a little bit overlapping, but that's because we're trying to sort of navigate the different work streams that exist here, and we'll continue to try to do that. Thanks, Ann.
Sure. So onto our federal infrastructure work group. So I think to give us some sense of direction and purpose, we created a purpose statement, essentially, you know, which states that we want to encourage communities and organizations around the county to collaborate and coordinate on acquiring the funding for projects and infrastructure supporting climate, equity, sustainability, and resilience. That's pretty broad, but we're trying to work with as many organizations and groups as we can. I've always said there's more work to be done than there are people and organizations. So we want to be mindful of not duplicating effort. And working in collaboration and coordination so that we are maximizing everybody's time and resources, which is not always easily done, but it's, you know, provides us opportunity to be mindful of other organizations' activities and priorities. And then on there are various grants or excuse me, goals associated with it. So we want to make sure that we prepare cities for the federal funding opportunities. We'll be talking about the different kinds in just a second, using the funds to meet your needs. So community organizations and cities and towns understand what their needs are. And so instead of, putting a round peg in a square hole, we'd really like for you to identify what your needs are specifically, so we can create those grants that will have the most impact individually and regionally. We want to coordinate multi-city, multi-organizational grants. So this is just not a one-off. We'd really like for communities to work together. And then, of course, connecting those with the community-based organizations. And of course, ASU has a lot of grant opportunities associated with energy, electric vehicles, you know, various other equity and so forth. And so we'd like to make sure that the cities are well represented in those efforts. And of course, at the end of the day, the goal is to, you know, increase the amount of federal fundings, grants, applications, but most importantly, the awards on a regional basis. And we want to make sure that communities are learning from each other. Equity has been maybe one of those things we've talked about a lot, but maybe not done so much in. And so we are really wanting to make sure that the projects that are put forth have equity at the center, so that we have the ability to meet some of the Justice 40 requirements, but meet the needs of those underrepresented communities as well. Braden, anything to add for that?
Nope, I think you did good.
All right. So as you can see, I mean, I know a lot of you have already heard about the different types of funding that's coming down from the federal government. Primarily with us, we're going to be more interested in the competitive funding and the formula funding as well. This was just a graphic that we happened to pull, but certain communities will have the benefit of the federal formula funding, and others will have to compete for it in different areas. And there are also some federal priorities that we have to be mindful of, in particular the Justice 40. I mean, in order to be competitive, you're going to have multi-city or regional applications. And then, of course, job creation is a big priority as well, making sure that what is implemented is transformative on a regional basis.
So yeah, folks may want to add to this, but just to understand, there's going to be certain certain amounts of money that are formula funding that you automatically get. So for instance, the Department of Energy, EECGB, their energy efficiency community block grants, which many of us received in the Obama era. There's a new version of it. It's much smaller. Top 10 cities in every state get direct funding. There's a formula for how much we get, and we automatically get it. So that's an example of the types of formula funding that exists. Then there's pass-through funding. So the FEMA BRIC program is an example of that. So there's program money that has to go through a state entity. So FEMA BRIC program, you cannot apply for it straight as a city or a county. You have to work with DEMA, and there's a process for that. We can talk more about, Larry can give us a little bit more insight into that. With the competitive funding, those are funding streams that they put out a grant and that you compete for it. There's several different types of competitive funding coming out in terms of who can apply. Some of the competitive grant funding are just tribes, cities, counties. Some of the new ones, like the environmental justice program out of the EPA, community-based organizations can apply to it. So, and nonprofits can apply to it. So there's a few different types of competitive funding streams, and we always want to make sure we know which are the eligible applicants. One thing that is exciting is Maricopa County Public Health is hiring a new climate and public health manager, and they're very interested for the ones that, for certain grants that might be harder for nonprofits to apply for, they're willing to act as pass-through funding or organizing funding for some of these key grants. So if a single organization isn't able to apply for that funding, we do have Maricopa County Public Health willing to help orchestrate some of that. Larry, anything you wanted to add in terms of the types of funding and how we describe them?
No, I think that pretty much covers the various types. And like you said, it really is kind of a broad swath that they have in there. Some of them are open specifically to universities as well. There are a number of BIL opportunities that are sort of white paper based, and then there are tons of pilot programs in this initial tranche of funding. And the big thing that they're looking for is scalability. They just want to see early on that new and emerging technologies are feasible, and then from that they're wanting to branch that out, and then down the line when the funding opportunities increase a little bit, that's where they're wanting to actually have those best case scenarios and examples to provide to everybody.
Great. We had a placeholder for EECBG if you had more information.
I do want to just talk a little bit more about EECGB because I think it's an important opportunity. So like I said, if you're a top 10 Arizona city, you have up until the fall to give a plan for how you're going to use your EECGB money. You can use it both for city operations. So you could use it to install solar, or you could use it to do energy efficiency projects in community buildings like your city hall or your library. I think you might be able to use it to install charging stations. You can use it to work on energy efficiency and renewable work in your own city. You can also use it to start community programs. So to start programs for residential programs or small and minority owned business energy efficiency programs. You as your own city can decide how to do that. That's the formula funding side. So top 10 cities, Arizona, formula funding. You make sure that you're communicating with the Department of Energy if you're one of those 10 cities that are eligible for that. If you're not in a top 10 city, and I think if you're in a county, but I don't know that for sure, you can apply for competitive funding. It would be wonderful if a group of smaller and mid-sized Arizona cities got together and worked with some partners on the competitive EECGB funding. Hopefully now, with the Office of Resiliency getting set up at the state of Arizona, there'll be an opportunity to maybe have some coordinating efforts around the competitive EECGB funding. But definitely, if you're interested, if you're a smaller community and you're interested in energy efficiency and having some of those funds or programs in your city, please let Ann and Chandler, please put it in the chat or follow up with Ann Chandler and I. It's a tremendous opportunity. This funding is a great, if you're not used to doing sustainability work in your community, this is a great place to start. It's also a really important place to start if you're a smaller community. So this is one of the sort of easiest grants to start with. Heavily encourage it. Danae?
I actually think Jim had a question first. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, yeah, I put in the chat. Does it help to have any use of matching funds from existing grant programs? So when
that's a great point. It depends on the grant. I know for what we're doing with the building code grant, we have to show match time. So some of these grants need to show match time. I always think it's a good idea when you apply for these federal grants to show how you've used previous funding to build your work, and then how you're applying, and then show, hey, we've done this program, we've done this program, we've done this program, and then now we're going to use your funding to grow this and this out based on our previous work. So even if it's not like a federal requirement for showing matching funds, I think showing how your funding fits into your overall strategy is a really strong move when you're applying for this grant. So Larry, I don't know, I saw you shake your head. Do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, you're dead on there. And just one additional thing for context, I will say early on in BIL funding, and this could change as the years go on with it, they've really been looking, DOT in particular, to see in their review process whether or not communities have had successful awards and whether they've been able to execute and complete those on time, especially because they're really trying to get things out the door and get some traction and show progress early on. So showing that you have grant fundings that you've received and that you've made good on to this point are definitely beneficial. But one thing to be mindful of, if you're wanting to utilize those as grant funding, you just have to be really careful in the NOFO, because a lot of them have maximum federal award participation amounts. So some of them might be 80-20 grants, but they also have an 80% maximum federal. So that means if you already are coming into place with some federal funding that you plan to use, you need to just account for that on the front end and either apply for a smaller amount or potentially look at using different funding for a match.
As a follow-up, I know that a lot of communities have used land and water conservation funds as matches for state parks, heritage fund grants for park projects in local, regional, and state parks.
It's a great point. And with some of the more complicated projects that folks might want to fund, especially some of these transportation projects, Shalini, who's been consulting with us, she calls it color of money. And like, to do some of these projects, you do need to stack different types of money. So there's definitely, for instance, times where you may have a federal grant to do healthy streets. When Phoenix does their healthy streets program, they're not just going to be using federal grant money for that. They're going to be using some of the money they've already been using for that, and they're going to feed that money in together. A lot of our cities are used to sort of those kind of capital stacks where you're mixing different funding streams in together for a particular infrastructure project. I love that example of parks and with historic preservation. Like, that's a great example, Jim. Danae?
Do you know if a city is receiving the formula funding, can they also go for the competitive
They
grant?
cannot.
Okay, it's one or the other.
Yes.
Got it.
Are you on the list? I was wondering where the cutoff was.
Yeah, we are, but like we don't receive very much. And so it doesn't, so it's like, all right, well, how far can we really take it?
Is your allotted funding like $40,000 or something?
We've got about 140,000.
Oh, 140. Oh, that's not
Yeah.
not as bad as I thought.
Yeah.
So, but it's hard to do a big project that way. You're absolutely right. So there's a lot of discussion about, well, what is the appropriate way to use that small type of money? And that's certainly one that we're having. And I think maybe at a future version of this meeting, we could have that discussion. Alexis, and then maybe we should move on so we can get through the rest of the presentation.
Good morning. I want to know what you recommended for a small town like Miami. We are 1,500 population, but at the same time, we have an infrastructure problem on roads, bridges. And I know when you say competitive, I'm being the big league. I'm the little guy in town, but I need to go against Phoenix, Gilbert, Chandler, Scottsdale, and all that guys. What do you recommend it?
Yeah, no, what a good question. I mean, I think one thing I recommend is staying in conversation with ADOT. And do you have an existing relationship with ADOT?
Yes, and I have a person in CAC with Travis, and he helping me, right? We're gonna be talking about the bridges grant, because we have like
Excellent.
5 small bridges in town, and we wanna make improvement in those.
Absolutely. So ADOT is going to be a huge champion of yours, having your mayor stay in contact with the governor's office and make sure that those political connections are made. I think that that's going to be huge. I think the other piece of this is that there is an opportunity for other partners, including maybe some partners at ASU, to help you with some of the other grant opportunities. So for instance, like this competitive energy efficiency grant. So there, if I'm small, I continue to work with my state and look for state collaboration opportunities. I continue to look at the research institutions that have some more capacity. And then what I try to do is really focus on maybe 1 or 2 other grants that could have the biggest bang for their buck. And so those would be my strategies there. And that's why we want to do this small cities working group, so that we can keep small cities in discussion about how to do this well and make sure that you're getting linked to resources at the state and resources at the universities. And you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to say that we're discussing with Local First Arizona, their Economic Development Center resources, which actually help small communities with those grant applications, and that, organizing and writing the narratives and everything. So more to come on that, because we'd love to work with you and the other small communities on how to leverage that. And maybe there are ASU resources available as far as student capacity that can help with support that initiative.
That's a great point. And have you been in touch with the rural team at Local First Arizona?
Yeah, we're setting up a meeting right now.
Oh, I know you are. Alexa, I was wondering if Alexis.
Yes, yeah. Brendan, yeah, we are already with BIDA. We make some contacts, but in our situation, my situation as a town manager, let me explain a little past history. They never put capital improvement on the budget. Now that I roads, bridges, and transit, those for us, and that's my biggest concern. We're running 3 biggest projects because the funding wise, it's necessary for the town to continue and improve, because we're talking about a town that is from 1918, and the bridges are from 1912. That tell you. And I'm coming with this big cake, and Ann knows that, this big cake, and I need to work on that. Because if I leave one of those elements back, I think I'm not going to have the money back on 2025 or 2026.
Yeah.
That's the situation.
And just to follow up on that question in small towns and tribal areas, I don't know if the Arizona Commerce Authority is involved in this process, but there is a rural revitalization office within that organization. And one would think that, they should be looped in and be a part of this process to help our smaller towns and communities.
That's good to know. I didn't know that.
Can you help us with a connection there?
Yeah.
Well, we're always trying to work for that connection. Yes. And I think that's a thrust of the new administration, is to help beef up rural revitalization issues and activities.
Great. Well, we'll be in touch then.
Great.
All right, Braden, we'll keep going.
All right, we have a limited amount of time, so I want to get through this. So as part of this work that's been funded by the Vitals Foundation to help us with this regional climate work, we've identified 4 federal grants that we think could be helpful for regional resilience. And when I say regional, we're talking about we want to coordinate ourselves in Maricopa County, but these are grant streams that are appropriate for Southern Arizona, rural Arizona, Northern Arizona as well. And some of these ideas are actually ideas that do need state level coordination. I'm just going to briefly go through them. We are going to do a workshop with our outside consultant specifically on these workshops. And if you have ideas, as you listen to each of these grants, if you have ideas on who statewide, regionally should be involved in that particular grant, please let us know. We need to be making these connections. When we have this workshop in March or April, we need to help get the right people in the room. Okay. And then Larry is going to be my sidekick in terms of filling in things that I get wrong. So building resilient infrastructure communities, the BRIC program, this is out of FEMA. This allows for actual infrastructure projects that help with emergency mitigation. So for flood mitigation, they can be used for extreme heat. And there is an opportunity for us to work with the state on those fundings. Phoenix has did that last year. They've been working on BRIC program funding for their own city. And Larry has generously offered at a future meeting to talk to us more about how Phoenix is thinking about the BRIC funding. And then our hope is that at this workshop, we can think about how we do submit BRIC applications to the state that are regional and multi-city. Larry, anything you want to add about BRIC?
Just one quick thing. I will say BRIC, think of it as two pieces. There's also the component of the flood mitigation assistance funding. So it's two separate programs, but they are under the hazard mitigation program. And with DEMA and FEMA through that application process, there are situations, and Phoenix actually had 2 of our projects that qualified under both programs. So it's kind of a value add you can put in for both. It's not really having to expend additional funds or work with consultants to work out different information. Same applications, a lot of overlap in between the 2 programs. But I would definitely suggest looking at it as early in advance as you can and coordinate with your county flood control district as well. And there's also a possibility that you can leverage funding from the county as part of your match. So kind of get creative and think about those things. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to kind of go over that at a later time.
Oh, we'll be bringing you back on that, Larry. So if you have emergency managers that might be interested in this regional conversation on BRIC, please let us know those emergency managers. We have been in touch with Robert Rowley at MCDEM. We have been in touch with the state, but anyone that wants to be helping us think about either flood mitigation or extreme heat mitigation, that grant program is going to be really interesting. I believe fall is going to be the submittal time for those grants. Next grant, incredibly important because this grant is grants that both community-based organizations, nonprofits, and cities can apply for. There's a bucket for jurisdictions, and then there's a bucket for nonprofits. These are specifically for environmental degradation. So that could be that could include flooding issues, that could include extreme heat, that could include environmental air pollution. It's pretty open in terms of my understanding. It's pretty open in terms of the types of threats that can get covered by this funding. This is also one of the funding streams that County Public Health is willing, and we're meeting with them later today to talk about potentially having them submit to this grant, but having a lot of nonprofits be sub-grantees to this grant. So really good. This grant will be several years in the making. There'll be multiple rounds of this grant. So definitely think that there's a good opportunity to apply to this year over year and learn from applying to this grant. Dorinda, did you have a question about the FEMA BRIC grant or this one?
The extreme one that you were mentioning, can you expand on it a little bit more, and what covers extreme heat?
So,
and I get what extreme heat is, don't get me wrong.
No.
What are you thinking?
Yeah, so this is an emerging issue on the BRIC program. Traditionally, the BRIC program for wildfires and for flooding, there's a very complicated cost-benefit analysis formula that you have to put in order to get the funding. and extreme heat mitigation efforts, whether they be building hardening or streets retrofits or urban forestry, we don't have great numbers for how to justify the cost benefit analysis for that. We are hearing, although there's not a final decision, that in future versions of the BRIC program, that they're going to make that formula more navigable for resilience to extreme heat, but those changes have not been made yet. So we're going to be having those meetings as a way of trying to, we're going to have this meeting. We're going to assume that those changes will be made so that we can qualify in Arizona for that BRIC funding, but that hasn't fully transformed yet. Larry, anything you want to add to that?
No, that we're in the same boat. We're just waiting for additional clarification on that language and the future opportunities.
All right,
Okay.
next slide. We really have to go quickly, and I want to give ASU a minute to talk. So this is the other one, Dorinda, that I wanted you to be aware of. There's a really great opportunity here with the Transportation Protect program. There is a very specific, so this is money that's formula funding that goes to the state. But this funding has a 2% set aside that has to be used for resilience planning. And what that means is that the state is going to be, the only way the state can use that money is if they actually create resilience plans, either for the state or then funnel money to us to create more localized resilience plans. ADOT has already done, actually, our consultant noticed that ADOT has done one of the best plans in the country around understanding our transportation systems vulnerabilities to heat and flooding. So ADOT actually is pretty far ahead in doing that work, which means that ADOT should be able to, one, advance that work with this funding, as well as bring that work down to the more local level. So for instance, this Protect funding could help us further understand our heat and our flooding vulnerabilities so that in Miami or in Globe or in Yuma or in, across the state, we should be able to better understand what our vulnerabilities are and have better plans ahead for how to further invest in that infrastructure due to extreme heat and flooding and other challenges with climate change. So we're excited to put a small group of folks together to help us think about this. We're trying to get ADOT at the table for this conversation, but our consultant firmly believes that this is a grant program where the state can really work with counties and cities on resilient infrastructure, and that we're in a great position because ADOT has already been doing some very solid work in this space. And then the last one, this is a little bit more complicated. There's a bunch of interesting Department of Energy grants coming out. Specifically, there's some interesting ones that could fund irrigation technologies and the combination of solar and agriculture, like what they call agrovoltaics. So there are a bunch of different Department of Energy and Department of Infrastructure programs that can support that will come out that she wants us to be aware of.
As far as the hydrogen hub and some of those ASU Lightworks related opportunities, I've talked a little bit with them, and I'm happy to work with through SCN to obtain letters of support and make connections. So I'll be working with ASU Lightworks in that process.
Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know we only have a couple of minutes time, basically, and we'll be planning future meetings. That's the next slide after this, but we would like your input and feedback as far as the stakeholders. It takes a village. So obviously we don't expect to know all the different players. And as we've seen just through connections with, Jim and some of the other ones on the call, there are clearly some rocks to be turned over so that we can make sure we have the right players for the right grants. So please let us know if you have a particular organization, community group, private business, etc., and who those contacts are so that we can invite them to the table to participate and at least listen. Awareness is really important in this project. Also, we're looking for those project ideas. We want to make sure this meets the needs. I mean, it's all about the community. So we want to make sure we have those immediate, but also mid and long-term projects in line. So it's kind of a continuum of opportunities. And then where is the capacity and what will give us capacity? So there's so much more that we need to discuss. Obviously, this is just kind of the tip of the iceberg. And we also have to figure out how to organize all of this effort so it makes sense to people and they can interact. So we'll be putting our heads together to facilitate that. We will have a website page. We'll have a federal infrastructure work group page as well. We do have the schedule set up for coming up. So our next meeting will be in a couple weeks, which is March 1st. I do anticipate that the work groups will actually be having some action type meetings as well. So we encourage you to also participate in the Sustainable Cities Network work groups, so we can dedicate some time to actually doing some things instead of just talking about things as well. So Braden?
Just a huge thank you for everyone that's come. Please stay in touch. Hopefully we can come back on March 1st. And March 1st, we'd like to dive into a few of these grants specifically. Love to learn from Larry about lessons learned from the BRIC program. And then we'll also be working on setting a date for the federal grants, for the regional grant work group that's going to work on the 4 grants that I mentioned. So really appreciate everyone being here. Stay in touch and we'll see you again March 1st, hopefully. And then please keep us in communication as you see other things that you think need to be coordinated in this venue.
Absolutely. Thank you, Braden. More to come. And if we can be of assistance in the meantime, please reach out to myself, Braden, Chandler, or Allison. We're happy to help you out.